Welcome, everyone. This is Jared Harding, and I am sitting across from the incomparable Dr. Joe Folkman. Joe, I'm really excited about this webinar today, first of all, because your research really brings a fresh point of view on a popular topic, and we have seen a lot of interest building up to this webinar today. Why do you think inspirational leadership is so popular?
Well, when we ask over 400,000 direct reports which competency was most important, guess what they rated number one? Inspires and motivates others. So this is something that people want in their lives. I think if you go to work and you have a job, you get a paycheck. If you go to work and you're inspired, you're on a mission. And there's a big difference there. We think every leader can be inspiring. We're going to talk about that today and give you the secrets.
And you can see from the agenda, we're going to take the survey live, have people input information, and we're going to deliver those results a little bit later in the webinar as we generate those reports. After the survey, we'll deliver some content around inspiring leaders and then get you your report, and we'll do some things with your own personal data to kind of get to that application and make these ideas actionable for you. So we'll have Joe talk a little bit about the assessment itself.
So let me tell you about the assessment. We did this research and found this inspiring others was such an important competency. It was so critical. And we tried to understand how people can be more inspiring. We're going to tell you about that in the webinar here today. But as we got looking at it, we thought about inspiring people. And if you think about Oprah Winfrey, I think everyone thinks she's inspiring. She's amazing, but the way she does it is very different from Warren Buffett. I mean, you talk about, really different ways. Now, Warren's inspiring because he knows the stock market, and whenever he buys a stock, it goes up. Oprah's different, and what we wanted to do was celebrate that. Frank Sinatra, his classic song, "I'll Do It My Way." Well, you need to do it your way. And what we found about inspiring is if we try to put, square pegs in round holes, it doesn't work. So we're trying to get you to understand what your hole is and how you're going to approach that. So this assessment looks at different ways that you approach inspiring others, and you'll find out, you'll get an assessment on which approach you have the greatest preference for.
All right, so if you're familiar with Singer-Folkman, you really know that our point of view is centered around what makes a leader extraordinary. And surprise, surprise, inspiring others can really play a critical role in a leader's overall effectiveness. So to help set the stage a little bit, I'm going to promote everyone listening today. You are all now the CEO.
Woo, thanks, Jared.
Yeah, that's easy, right?
The pay, I assume.
Oh, wait, yeah, pay, that's negotiable after.
In the mail?
Yeah, in the mail, that's right. All right, so we have this dilemma for you. And as a CEO, you have to make tough decisions. So here's your dilemma. You've just received some analysis from your last calendar year, and it indicates a correlation between leadership effectiveness of your managers. That's measured by employee feedback. Of course, that's how we do things at Singer-Folkman. But that is correlated to the profitability of that manager's branch. So you can see on the average, your top 10%, your most effective managers, created $4.5 million of profit per branch. The bottom 10%, lost $1.2 million per branch. And the profitability of those remaining branches was the average of $2.4 million. All right, so here's your tough decision. You can only implement one change for the new calendar year. What is that change going to be? So we're going to put up a poll here. And now the remaining polls, just to clarify, remaining polls don't impact your survey results. These are all just interaction now in our webinar.
Yeah, there are no bad answers.
Yeah, that's right. So here are your options as the CEO. So you put a plan in place that will replace all bottom 10% managers or close an unprofitable branch within the calendar year? Do you create a program to increase the performance of the bottom 10% and form strict accountability? Hire Singer-Folkman to fix all your problems. That seems really easy. But rather than just focusing on the bottom 10%, you decide to implement a program that will raise the bar for all the managers, for everyone. Or, last choice there, you restructure the org chart to promote the top 10% managers as regional managers. And hopefully, of course, they're going to mentor those lowest performing managers. So we know it's difficult to choose one, but my dad always told me sometimes in life you got to do hard things. So go ahead and enter in your response here. What is it that you're most likely to do as CEO of this company?
Wow, this is surprising.
Yeah, I'm surprised not everybody's not choosing Zenger Folkman to fix all the problems. Many people may not know Dr. Folkman's street name is actually the Fixer.
Oh, yeah. that could have the other business that I'm running.
Okay, thank you for doing hard things. So let's just take a look at what the impact of your decision as a CEO will have on your organization. So we got three kind of outcomes of your choice. You're going to add 5%, 7.5%, or 20% to your bottom line. And I know you're kind of anxious. So which of the answers yields, which outcome? So let's start with adding 5%. Any plan that focused on replacing or training the bottom 10% can add 5% to your bottom line. What that requires is 100% of those managers you get, whether they're replaced by or you develop them, and they start performing at average. That'll add 5% to your bottom line.
The best we've ever gotten is around 60% of leaders, when we do our best job, and that's pretty good. I mean, we did get one organization that had 80, but, it's hard to get everyone to improve.
Yeah. So then how about 7.5%? So if you chose the option where you increase the standard for everyone, so if you had a third of your bottom 10% move up to average, and then about that same number, which would be about 3% of the average managers perform at the top 10%. So you have some move from poor to good, you have some move from good to great. That's going to add about 7.5% to your bottom line.
Not there yet.
So 20%, how are we going to get there? All right, so I enjoy trick questions a little bit, and so here's a secret answer. If you were to focus on developing 10% of the good managers into great managers, to go from that good group to that great group, you would add 20% to your bottom line. And there's a little bit of a reason that this was a secret answer, because if we would have put it on the screen, it's an obvious. All of a sudden, this is something that, that's of course what I would do. But what we find with the organizations that we work with is they don't suffer from this kind of being overrun by terrible leaders, but oftentimes that their good leaders are going unchallenged. So great leaders make a big difference, don't they, Joe?
They really do, and it's so fascinating. I was with a group recently, and I showed them all the data between good and great, and I said, so does your organization need good leaders? And everybody said yes, and I said, no. Listen again, do they need good leaders? And somebody said, oh, wait a minute. I think we need great leaders. And that's the point here. That's the point. Great leaders increase turnover by 25% less annual turnover, 40% higher customer satisfaction, 2x employees willing to go the extra mile. That's discretionary effort. So what makes an extraordinary leader? What's the difference there? And the first thing that we discovered was not all behaviors, not all competencies are the same. I looked at an item as on time to meetings. And when we looked at that item and we compared the best leaders against the worst leaders, what we discovered is there was no difference between the best and the worst leaders. It didn't matter when you came to a meeting. What mattered is what you did when you got to the meeting. So we find that some behaviors really don't help. They don't differentiate, but others do. Problem solving helps. But when we looked at all behaviors, we found that inspiring and motivating others helps people the most. Now, we did this research 15 years ago. We've just replicated it with 120,000 leaders. And we really found that the data is consistent across all those leaders, and the new data is consistent with the old data. And so what the data says about what makes the most difference, when we looked at 16 competencies and we had people rate them on how effective leaders were. Out of the 16 competencies, guess which one came in dead last? Well, it inspires and motivates others. It is the most difficult competency to conquer. But when we ask people which one was the most important, and especially the direct reports, they said that inspiring and motivating others was the most important competency. When we looked at which competency increased employee engagement the most, it was inspires and motivates others. And when we asked which is the best predictor of overall leadership effectiveness, which differentiated the most, inspires and motivates others. So it's the toughest one to develop, but it's the most important one to have, and it does the most for engagement. This is a very powerful competency.
And that's why it's that silver-ish bullet, right? It's kind of that closest competency to being that all-powerful solution, but there really is no one silver bullet, one competency that conquers everything for leadership.
Sorry.
Gotta love doing those hard things.
Yeah.
All right, so the thing that I really love too about the research is it not only do we have those kind of discoveries, but it brings a level of practicality to developing something like becoming an inspiring leader. It is difficult, but there's a way to do it. So it's really encouraging that it's just as realistic for folks participating in the webinar today to create their own personal recipe to go with our theme to be an inspiring leader as it would be for them to go find an amazing recipe for chocolate chip cookies. Insight from the data really makes it actionable for how we can get there. So we're going to jump into a little more of this how-to side, but to start, we want to have you give us a list of leaders that you think are inspiring. And I'm going to encourage you to think of people that everyone will know. So despite how inspiring your Uncle Billy is, let's get a list of people that we would all be familiar with and have some names pop up here.
Well, they're starting to come in, and this is an interesting list so far.
Yeah, I think Melinda Gates is a great kind of choice, often in the shadow of her husband sometimes. So calling her out, I think that's great.
Well, Steve Jobs is there. Well, that's a surprise.
We got Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. So this is a great list. Oh, and of course, we have Uncle Billy. We've got a comedian in the audience. So as you look at the names coming in for yourself, what are some of the common things that you see between these people? What are some of the differences? There are people on the list that surprised you and you would think, well, why would someone, maybe find them inspiring? But I think perhaps the most common thing is, right, Dr. Folkman, I don't think you could put all of these leaders into one single category.
And really, that list really accentuates our whole issue here. They are so different. And probably as you looked at the list, you said, I'm not inspired by that guy. But I am by this person or that woman. And what's fascinating about it is they're different. I mean, that's exciting to me because I'm different. And that gives me hope that my differences can be of value. And this is what we found. It is interesting to sit down with people and say, so what would you do to be more inspiring? Do you have some good ideas? What do inspiring leaders do? And here's the top picks for what people come up with. They say, just be more perky and positive because it seems like inspiring leaders are perky and positive. Think of Richard Simmons. Well, not everybody's cup of tea. All right. Pep talks. You got him down there and you say, all right, we got to do it. This is it. All right. And giving that pep talk in the locker room. Or this one probably works for somebody. High fives. I guess that.
As long as you wash your hands.
Yeah. Well,
lots of high fives.
What we found is that this intuitive notion about how to be more inspiring usually doesn't get people very far. In fact, oftentimes it gets them off on the wrong leg, and most often it doesn't fit them. So what works? Well, we looked at 14,000 leaders. We've replicated this with 80,000 leaders. What we found is that inspiring leaders, they engaged in these enabling behaviors. These are behaviors that when people are really good at this behavior, they tended to be more inspiring. So the behavior helped them to be inspiring. And what we found is, and we've studied this with thousands of leaders, when they made a significant improvement in inspiring and motivating others, these 10 also improved. So I just want to walk through the 10 and just talk about them a little bit. Number one, making the emotional connection. When people can do that with just a smile or just a hello, but there's a positive connection between you and another person, that's inspiring. Have you ever accomplished a difficult task? How did you feel after you were done? Boy, most people are excited and they're up. Leaders who know how to get their employees to do something difficult are more inspiring. You ever been lost and then found your way? Boy, what a relief. When leaders help people know what direction to go and give them the right direction, that's inspiring. Communication is a great way to be inspiring. The problem is most of the time people don't do it often enough, and they do it in a way that's kind of boring and mundane. Communicating powerfully can be very inspiring. Think of somebody that's helped you develop, somebody that was a mentor or a coach to you. How do you feel about that person? They're inspiring because people want to develop. You ever been on a really great team, a team where you loved being there? You ever been on the team from hell? You know the difference? Because building a great team is inspiring. Innovation, there's always a way to do something quicker, faster, or more efficiently. And when that happens, that's inspiring. Inspiring leaders take initiative. They get things done. They get things started. They are able to champion change and create change in an organization. And inspiring leaders, when they want something done, they do it first. They're a role model and they walk their talk. When you do that, you're inspiring. Now, these are the 10 behaviors that help a leader to be more inspiring. And you don't have to be perfect at every one of these. You can use these as levers and you use the one that you like the most. Now, after we discovered this, we started to say, but people do it differently. People go about this in very different ways. So to understand this, we looked at the 1,000 leaders who scored highest on inspiring and motivating others, and then we did a cluster analysis on them. What we found were there were these 6 different approaches, these ways that people go about inspiring, and they're all different. They all work, but some fit you and some don't. So let's talk about these 6 different approaches. The first one we call the enthusiast. This is the classic way we define an inspiring leader. So these people show passion, vitality, and strength and vigor. They're dynamic as opposed to passive, generate energy. They tend to be extroverts. Oftentimes they are optimists. Think of Richard Branson or Herb Kelleher, the old CEO of Southwest. These people were enthusiasts. They bubble. They are fun. They do great things. But not everybody can be an enthusiast, right? And that's one approach. A second approach is the visionary. Visionaries are, in chess, always thinking 2 moves ahead. They are future-focused and forward-thinking. They make lofty goals. And if you're a visionary, you're kind of thinking about that next thing, that next possible thing. Steve Jobs, very visionary. Elon Musk. Martin Luther King was another visionary. The next one is the enhancer. Enhancers make people feel good about themselves. They are great at forming positive relationships. They convey personal interest in others. They treat others with respect and dignity. They're positive, emphasizing the pull rather than the push. Now, enhancers, like CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi, or Bill Clinton for that matter, who was a classic enhancer, these people are great and they really are helpful, but not everybody is an enhancer. Another way to inspire others is the expert approach. Experts bring important up-to-date information to the team, find innovative ways to solve problems, expand the team's technical grasp, use personal expertise to help implement solutions. Think of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, both experts. The next one is this principled approach. What principled people do is emphasize the model of high integrity, strongly encourage others to follow the rules and establish procedures. So we oftentimes find that people in quality and safety are principled. And people in HR are oftentimes principled because they want you to follow this procedure, this approach. They never ask others to compromise, and they want people to follow the rules. Think of Abraham Lincoln or Pope Francis as principled people. The last one is drivers. Drivers get stuff done. They make things happen. They emphasize achieving the organizational needs, and they set deadlines and they meet them. They fill commitments no matter what it takes. They believe that being on time and within budgets are necessary outcomes, not nice aspirations. Think of Jack Welch, great driver. Now, as you think about these different CEOs, there's probably one approach that's more dominant than another, but you can think of like a Steve Jobs as being, well, a visionary driver, right? Because did both. And so you'll find some of these things merge together, and people oftentimes have multiple approaches.
All right. So if you find your report, you can go ahead and open that up and take a look at what you have. You're going to notice the higher numbers indicate a stronger preference for that particular approach. And you should have a primary approach. This can be your highest score, secondary, of course. And oftentimes you'll have similar scores. So I've seen reports where, people, their top 3 scores are all the same. So sometimes that's the case. But you have those listed. And then you also have an avoided approach shown. Not everybody has an avoided approach. So to get that avoided approach, it had to be something, boy, you really choose last frequently.
Put it in last place often, and I avoid that.
Yeah. Then you also notice there's a flexibility score. The flexibility score is kind of the likelihood that you alter your response for given situations. So you frequently use multiple approaches based on, whatever the circumstances may be.
So the more dominant you are on one approach, the lower your flexibility.
Yep. Average flexibility is about 15. High flexibility is 17 and above. We talked already about the avoidance score a little bit, but what's interesting is 10% of leaders avoid the enthusiast or expert approaches, and only 1% to 2% of leaders avoid the other approaches. So really not a common thing to have an avoided approach.
It is interesting that classic way people think about inspiring gets avoided 10% of the time.
That's right, the enthusiast, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to get your report, just kind of look through it, see what your scores are there. Are you surprised? Are you surprised by the results that you got back? Does this kind of start to point you in a direction in a way that you can be an inspiring leader?
And what this does show you is your preference for something. What we know about your preference is there is a correlation between your preference and your ability, right? Those things that you prefer, you tend to be better at. Okay, it's not a perfect correlation, but this kind of knee-jerk reaction, this initial reaction, I do this first, that's usually something you're pretty good at.
So what we want you to do now, after you've had a chance to review your results, this is a word cloud. And so you're going to select a word, and this also accepts emojis, that's kind of cool, that represents your reaction. So if you're in a computer browser, of course, you don't have the option for emojis, but that's why you can put in a word. But if you're on a mobile device and you want to throw in an emoji to kind of represent your response, let's see what we get.
And it's fun to just watch this, and as something comes up that you agree with, you put in the same word, you'll see that kind of grows a little bit. So the power of this is kind of fun because it's sort of building, and this is really interesting. Lots of good things there.
I remember when I took this survey, our workshop version of this survey several years ago, my primary approach was visionary, followed by driver. Not much has changed since those times. Maybe I need to kind of work on my flexibility score. So it looks like someone's reaction is a taco. I love tacos. In fact, I take every other Tuesday, I take my team, we celebrate Taco Tuesday. So I do believe tacos can be inspiring.
Yeah, he's also cheap.
Well, sometimes they're gas station tacos. Sometimes, we go a little bit upscale. Sometimes.
All right. That's great. Well, that's fun to look at that. It's fun to see, and I see some really good stuff there. Let's look at how you guys compared to the norm. If we look at our norms, and we've collected data on over 10,000 people on this particular assessment, so we have quite a lot of data here. Here's how the norms come out. You can see that our highest norm is around visionary, 27%. That's their primary approach. The second highest, principal, which is kind of interesting. Third highest, driver. What a surprise. Enthusiast, 14%. Enhancer, 13%. And you can kind of see where you're coming in compared to the norm. Now, experts, interesting. What we find is that if we're dealing with a lot of individual contributors, that expert will go up. And a lot of managers tell me that, early on in their career, that was their approach, but then they sort of moved to other approaches. You do see your approach changing over time, and so that's a good example of that, how people start off as experts. Let's look at the secondary approach. What you notice here is it's pretty close to what we found on the first, although now the visionary and principal are tied. And you have the driver at 19%, enthusiast 14%. Expert here is 9%. So a higher percentage of people pick that up as a secondary approach on theirs. And then you can see how your results compare to theirs. And again, this is another miracle Jared has performed, that this data all comes in, gets crunched, and put in the graphs. I don't know how you did this.
It's amazing.
It's
amazing. What's cool is, one of the angles that we're taking on this webinar is that this is a format for learning that you can do in a group, right? Do with a large group, with an intact team. And how cool would it be to see your group's approach as a group? We did this for a large IT leadership team. There's about 200 managers in this big IT organization. And there was no enthusiasm in that group. There was very high on experts and drivers, very little enthusiasm as a primary or secondary approach. But it was fun as a group for them to see their approach, their preferences as a group.
I did it with a senior leadership team, and not one person in the team was an enhancer. As they talked about it, they kind of sat back and said, what does that do when no one here sort of takes that point of view? It's really difficult for them, and they kind of were viewed as a little unfeeling.
Yeah.
Because no one really, had that perspective or voiced it very often.
So it paints a good picture of the team,
It does.
of how the team is.
It does.
All right, so let's start to bring this baby home and move into, how we start to make this actionable. Now that you have an idea of your preferences, let's move to some application. So we're going to give you another mini case study this time. So you're not a CEO anymore, sorry, but you are on a team trying to conduct a project, implement a project, but things have gone awry. And now you've decided to take matters into your own hands. So we're going to list some approaches here. We're going to ask, what approach are you most likely to take? So here you go. We got the poll up. And so what approach? Are you going to encourage a faster pace, focus the team on the deadline? Are you going to remind people that other people in the organization are counting on your team? Are you going to utilize your knowledge, your expertise to support the team with a plan? Are you going to encourage greater cooperation and trust between team members, try to resurrect it that way? Are you going to find new strategies for the team to accomplish the goal? Or are you going to get that excitement, gear it up, and hope that would be contagious? So which approach are you most likely to take? As we're kind of putting this in and seeing some responses come in, the other question that I would just kind of have you think about is, what outcome would you expect? How would you expect the team to respond, the approach that you would take here?
It's interesting that there's a positive for every approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also kind of a downside. Well, that's interesting, Jared.
Yeah, so let's put your case study on hold here and let Joe talk about a little bit of data, but we'll revisit this.
Now, we have the opinion here at Zinger-Folkman that using multiple approaches is really a good thing, and there's some benefit from it. What we did is we looked at your ability to inspire, and we looked at the number of approaches where you were rated at the 90th percentile. So this isn't your preference. This is your actual effectiveness is rated by others. We were able to measure this using our 360 assessment. So if you didn't have any one of the approaches that you were really good at, so strong preference, strong capability, your average ability to inspire was at the 41st percentile. If you did one well, if you were really good at one approach, if you were a one-shot wonder, you can see you almost double your ability to inspire. You're 20 points above average if you do one well, if you use one approach. If you use two approaches, you're at the 83rd percentile. And three, if you just do three approaches well, you're in the top 10%. Now, as you look at that data, you can see the value of multiple approaches. And to try and understand that a little bit, we did some analysis on enhancer driver enthusiast, and we looked at how people were rated if they were good at those different approaches or not so good. And what we found is that enhancers tended to be trusted. If you're an enhancer, you tend to be trusted. But notice that if you're a driver and enthusiast, you were a little less trusted. Enthusiasts tend to be great at champions change, but enhancers aren't as good. So what you see happening with the approaches is your abilities on one approach really helps you to do some things, but you're not as good at other things. So that's the secret of using multiple approaches. You're able to create a recipe that's balanced because it brings all these things together.
So with that knowledge, let's go back and revisit the team situation. You probably said, well, why didn't you tell me this at the beginning, right? So what would you do different? What additional approach would you try? So we're going to go back. You've got the same 6 options again that you would try to do to get this floundering team project back on track. So go ahead and respond, and I'm assuming we're going to see some differences. And it's going to be important that you remember what you've selected here in terms of how you're going to help your group. And you're probably a bit relieved. Very difficult to choose between the list. And so applying a second approach to what you would do to help the team provides a bit of relief.
As we do this actually in the situation, this is such a profound exercise for people because they start to see the power of their approach, but others that use a different approach, they tend to see it better. And this really it's an insight that people get all of a sudden. They say, oh, when you mix these together, and it really helps people see the value of diversity, doesn't it?
It does.
We've known that for a long time, that getting a diverse group together gives you a better answer. And we're talking about diversity in approaches here, right?
So now remember what you selected for these 2 approaches and how you were going to tackle this team situation. And then here what we'll show you is the actual approach for that statement, right? Inspiring leader approach. And so interesting, just take a look. Remember what you picked. Does that align with your self-assessment? And you saw some similarities in the language. And to Joe's point, I mean, this is a powerful thing in the full workshop that we do around the inspiring leader. It's interesting as we have groups work together on a case study and apply their approach, you tend to start seeing groups naturally start to apply multiple approaches because people see the value in it and they see how they start to be connected as they're trying to kind of overcome the problems.
Well, that's a fun exercise, Jared.
All right. So now, what's next? We've talked about the approaches. You've got your results. We've talked about the value of adding multiple approaches and focusing there. So really, it does come down to how do you create your own recipe? You have your primary approach, and what we would encourage you to do is, what is another approach that you could add to that? And maybe you had your own scores. You had 2 approaches that were really high and a bunch of others that maybe weren't so high. What other approach can you start to combine together that will really complement your leadership style to help you be a more inspiring leader? We talked a little bit about, Joe covered those 10 inspirational behaviors, and we don't have time today to cover all the details about how you apply those, but those are really key to kind of starting to create those action plans when you figure out what approach you're going to work on to make yourself a more inspiring leader. And then you take these behaviors through that lens to really help you create some action-oriented ideas to be better. So what we've created are these action planning guides. You see some examples on the screen that will help you create those personalized action statements that are going to combine the approach that you've chosen to work on with those behaviors that you've chosen to work on. And so this guide will help you with that. So watch your email that will follow this webinar for how you get those.
And Jared, I'd just say that we used our analytics to give you those guides and give you the order of the preference of the companion behaviors and which of the companion behaviors work the best for every different approach. And so they can be very helpful in helping you to be a more inspiring leader.
All right. Was this valuable? What did you get out of our time together today? We're going to close this with a word cloud and have you share with us, in a few words, new actions that you're going to take, new ideas that you had as a result of this webinar. Of all of our content too, one of the most exciting concepts for me here is it really is about the clarity around something that people, I think, sometimes think inspiring leadership, you have it or you don't. You're lucky or you're not. And what we have really, I hope, demonstrated here for all of you is that this is something that you can do. This is something that you can build strengths in and that it can play a very critical role in your leadership. So I've enjoyed this interaction, appreciate everyone's participation today. Joe, final thoughts?
When my kids were young, my girls, I went up to them and I said, "What do leaders do?" And Rachel, my older daughter, she said, "They're the boss. They tell people what to do." And I said, "Where'd you come up with that?" And they said, "From you." You're always saying you're the boss. I think early on, we all kind of learn about push. We all learn about drive for results. That's our kind of knee-jerk. And when people need to get stuff done, they push. We studied this and we looked at leaders who were good at pushing as opposed to pulling. What we found is the best leaders do both. Now, if you're good at pushing, great. You're halfway there, but only half. The way to get all the way there is to push and pull. Today, we've talked about pulling. Our belief is everybody can be inspiring. Now, your approach is different than others, and what we've tried to do is give you an approach that fits your personality, that fits the way you want to do things. You can be an expert and be inspiring. You can be an enhancer and be inspiring. But we think every person can be a more inspiring leader. What happens when inspiration occurs in an organization is it changes from work to a mission, to a cause. People can make an enormous difference. As a leader, if you want to be a valuable leader, if you want a skill that not very many people have, this is the one. This will make you stand out and differentiate yourself from others. So we'd love to give you more insight on this. We think this is a really important way to do it. If you've enjoyed this experience for yourself, we can do this for your group or your audience or for a meeting. I think this will be a really dynamite learning experience for everyone. Thanks so much, and thanks for joining us today on this webinar.